Thank you all for joining. It's wonderful to have you here tonight. My name is Anita Verna-Crops. I'm the Associate Director at the Communication Leadership Graduate Program at the University of Washington. We are really grateful to see you all, those that we know well, that are part of our community, those that might be joining for the first time. You are all welcome. We're thrilled to have you here. This is the third of our student-run COVID Consultancy's 5-part speaker series titled Communication and Connection in the Time of COVID. Our topic tonight is Enterprise Communications During COVID-19, a view from Medtronic's IT Rapid Response Team. I'm very excited. A few announcements before I introduce our special guest, who is known to many of you. First, we are recording tonight's conversation. Secondly, if you would be so kind, if you have the Wi-Fi capability, to turn on your camera, as it's always wonderful to see who we have here at our call. Third, anticipating the audience Q&A session, we invite all of you to type your questions into the chat box at any time during the time of the unfolding of this talk. Our Zoom DJ, Ryan Quigtar, thank you, Ryan, will then collect and pose questions to Carol later on in the program. So really at any time, please feel free to put a question into the chat box. There's no need to wait for that particular session. We will be collecting them from now forward. So that invitation stands from now on. And then fourth, before I actually more officially welcome and introduce Carol, I'd like to turn it over to Evelyn for a moment, because there is a fresh off the, I guess it wouldn't be presses, a fresh off the hard drive COVID Consultancy video that we'd love to screen for those here that are on the call. So Evelyn, take it away.
Does the COVID-19 pandemic have you or your organization struggling to connect? The University of Washington's Communication Leadership Program is here to help. We have assembled our COVID-19 consultancy to help nonprofits, small businesses, and on-campus departments. We can help you communicate within your organization and with your audience, pivot communication strategies in the face of COVID-19, create videos and other multimedia assets, and host online events. As community builders and communication professionals with expertise in digital technology, our graduate students and alumni are uniquely equipped for this moment. We're offering pro bono consulting, events, and professional connections. Whether you're a business owner, an employee, or simply looking to improve your communication strategies, we're here to help you. For more information and to schedule a consultation, visit bit.ly/UWCOVIDhelp.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Evelyn, and thanks to Mo for all the work on that, and I know the whole team putting it together. You know, really the chance to see that video unfolding brings into focus not only the kind of opportunities that this consultancy has created, like the one we're having tonight, where we get to hear from subject matter experts that help us make and have that sense-making moment together around the time of COVID, but the fact that there's a really strong service component to the consultancy, and that part of the reason for being is to extend that strategic hand to local nonprofits, to our backyard at the University of Washington, the entities that need that support. And it just gives me no end of pleasure to see how the consultancy has really taken on that charge and embodied the ethos behind the conception of the concept and the conception of what it could be. So thrilled to be able to share that video with all of you, and thanks so much for the work. It's been tremendous to see how things develop rapidly and in a responsive way. So very, very pleased with that. Now, Carol Schiller, welcome.
How are you?
It's great to see you. You know, Carol, 2 weeks ago, I was in conversation with Melissa Schwartz, and I made a crack about how when Melissa and I connected, we immediately had a simpatico over our East Coast sensibilities. And the truth is that holds absolutely true with you as well. Carol and I met about 5 years ago when we were lucky enough to have Carol join the CommLead faculty. And I remember connecting with you on the telephone, and I think it was revealed pretty quickly that the Northeast, and not just the Northeast, but I think it's fair to say sort of the tri-state area, the greater New York City area was home to both of us. And that was an immediate connection that has not let up till this day. And so I'm delighted to have you here on the call. And for those of you that aren't as familiar with Carol, I'll do a bit of a preamble before turning the Zoom call over to you to take us into the beginning of this conversation. But for those that aren't as familiar with Carol, she is the founder and CEO of the Bellevue-based digital agency Rumble Marketing. She's got 20 years of experience in business-to-business and business-to-consumer marketing, communications, and brand storytelling. And for the last 7 years, Carol has led the Rumble creative team and worked with a client roster that I'm gonna think is sort of familiar to folks on this call. Some brands along the lines of Starbucks, Boeing, Microsoft, yeah, you know, some of the big guys. And as I said earlier, about 5 years ago, we were lucky enough at the Com Lead program to actually be able to have someone like Carol offering classes for our students. And her copywriting fundamentals for marketing, I gotta say, it's packing classrooms. And if I had $1 for every student that told me that Carol's class transformed the way that they thought about language and writing, I would treat you all to dinner. So it is my absolute pleasure to have you here, Carol. Let us begin. And the idea for the evening is that we're gonna have you speak for about 20 minutes. I know you've got something prepared. And then I'm going to follow up with a couple questions that will bridge us to the live Q&A with the broader audience. And let me also remind people again, please put your questions in at any time. And after we have a nice back and forth in terms of the questions coming from the floor, Carol has also prepared a call to action, which is a hallmark of these COVID-19 connection sessions. So after that call to action, I'll have just a couple quick announcements, and then we'll move to our tradition, which is to take the camera off and just create that 15 minutes or so hanging out after the talk where we get to casually connect, have that fellowship after the talk, and then we'll aim to wrap it around 7 o'clock per usual. So if that sounds good to you, Carol, welcome. We're delighted to have you, and I will now turn it over to you to present, and then look forward to some follow-up questions about 20.
Excellent. So what I'm going to do, thank you so much for that introduction, Anita. Hi, everybody. I definitely see some familiar names and faces here, and I'm really excited about that. I have to say, when I think I had mentioned to you, the Friday before Memorial Day weekend, I really appreciate that people took the time to show up. So I'm going to try and make it worth your while. Let me just share my screen here. So there we go. And I will just switch it to speaker view. Will you let me know if it's viewing properly? Anita,
Yes.
you are muted.
I'm muted. Of course I am. Looks great to me.
Okay, looks good.
Thank you, Evelyn, for chiming in because I was muted.
Okay, awesome. All right, so basically, there are a lot of things we could talk about when it comes to enterprise communications, but I really wanted to focus on rapid response because, well, sort of for two reasons. So first of all, because the purpose of this organization that the UW has spun up to help small businesses and organizations and also departments within the UW is related to rapidly responding to the changing COVID-19 environment. So I thought that would be an appropriate thing to sort of touch upon. And then also because as part of my work at Rumble, I've spent about the last 12 weeks working on the rapid response team that is associated with the IT department of Medtronic. And it just so happened that I'd already been engaged on a consulting engagement with them at the time that COVID-19 hit. And so instead of just working on the original organizational storytelling ask, very quickly I had to pivot and start working on some rapid response communications. I do want to make it clear that I'm not going to talk at all about the details of that work. I'm only going to mention that in sort of the context of that's why I think rapid response is important, because not just for them, obviously they're a very important company that's doing amazing work right now, and I'm really proud to have had the chance to be working with them, but there are many companies that are moving very rapidly in this environment. And what I want to kind of do is say, okay, what are some of the principles associated with rapid response communications that apply no matter where you are? Doesn't matter what the company is, what are some of the things you need to be thinking about? So with that, I'm going to dive right in. And if people have questions, what I'm noticing right now is that my chat box is not showing up really well. So if Anita, maybe wave at me if there's a question, if I'm going too fast, and then I'll just slow down a little bit.
Absolutely, and you are well covered in terms of the chat box. There's
Okay.
an entire armada of individuals who are moderating the chat box, so you don't have to worry about that, Carol. We'll
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And so I will try, and then for those of who, there's a couple of people who've taken my class on this call, so for those of you who know me, I tend to be pretty tactical. Like, okay, we'll start with a little bit of theory, but I like to dive right into some very practical ways you can apply. I'm going to try to do that today too. So first of all, when you're thinking about, what are some core strategic communication principles that you apply no matter where you're finding yourself. Hang on a second, why is this not letting me jump ahead? Oh yeah, there we go. So first of all, this idea that especially when you're in crisis mode and things are moving really fast. I mean, this is always true, but it's especially true when you're in crisis mode. You want to ground your stories in data, right? And of course, I could focus on a lot of principles, but I think these three are particularly important when things are moving really fast. So I want you to think about, what are the kinds of data that support your story? And I'll talk to you about why that's important. But the most important thing about it is that when you do database storytelling, you are showing, not telling, right? So proof is very important when things are moving fast because people have a lot of different ideas. They're not really sure what to do. And the person who shows up with evidence, with proof, is going to get to the front of the line. So we always want to ground our stories in data, even more so when things are moving rapidly and there's some kind of a crisis, right? And the other thing that's really important is to have some kind of predictable structure. Again, when things are in crisis mode, everything feels a little bit crazy. What you want to have is have some element of predictability. I know what to look for. Even when some things are uncertain, how can I organize my information in a very predictable way? So as a communicator, you want to build some structure into your story. And then the last thing is, again, we think about calls to action typically when we think about external communications. But the truth is, it's just as important when you communicate internally, that it's really clear what you want people to do. What is the next step is a really important part of rapid response, because obviously people can't take action if they don't know specifically what they need to do. So these are kind of the three basic principles that you want to establish when you're trying to put together some kind of communication plan. And then once you've kind of got those principles, the next thing you're going to do is get a little bit more grounded in the specifics. So you want to think about who your audience is and what the purpose of that communication is. And that means just asking yourself some really important questions. And starting from who's going to read this, right? Who is the stakeholder who has to consume this information? And what are the things that they're going to need to decide? And then have I done the work required to make that decision, right? So when you think about what things mean for stakeholders, why does it matter to them? And then you put the information in that logical order, it's much easier for them to come along with whatever your recommendation is, or to buy into whatever it is that you're trying to explain is happening in the organization. So that's sort of the theory behind it. And now I want to show you some kind of basically completely made up example. Think of this as historical fiction. So there's a little bit of reality in it and a little bit of fictionalized example, okay? And remember, we're going to look at how we use data, structure, and call to action. Those are the three things we're going to try to use, right? Okay, so here we go. So imagine you have some kind of a trigger for a business event. There's all kinds of triggers. We recently experienced an example of one of those. So when Trump made a remark about the injection of disinfectants, if you are a company that makes a disinfectant, for you, this becomes a triggering event, right? Now, there's all different kinds of business impacting events that could happen. Sometimes it's a tweet from the president. Sometimes it's an acquisition. Maybe an acquisition is announced, and you're going to have to rapidly pivot and figure out your internal communications associated with an acquisition. Or maybe it's some other kind of business event. But whatever it is, there's going to be some kind of a trigger, and you have to respond to it. And as part of your response, you have to use data to decide what to do. So when you look at something like this and you say, a lot of people would say, oh, it's a no-brainer. Of course we have to, spin up some kind of information about, no, you shouldn't inject yourself with a disinfectant. Well, that's not a no-brainer. Maybe the best response is to just be quiet and do nothing and just let that story die, because the next day some news story is going to come out. You don't know for sure what the right response is. And you can't just show up and make a recommendation one way or the other without some kind of proof. And that's where data comes in, right? So again, this is a completely made up example. So this genuinely happened, but if you worked at a company that made some kind of a disinfectant, you might have to respond to that, right? And so you're the communication person who has to come up with the report that is going to tell the company what they need to do from a communication point of view, right? So your typical initial report might be something like, oh my gosh, our call centers are overloaded, right? Which is true, but that's not really something that you're proving. You're not showing it, you're telling. Okay, I heard you, call centers are overloaded. You told me that. Maybe that's true, but I'm not super persuaded by that. So, okay, maybe you're going to say, oh, our customers are confused about how to use some kind of brand name cleaning product. So it doesn't matter whether it's Clorox or Lysol or any one of these brand name cleaning products. I just made it up. Okay, so we know our call centers are overloaded and they're confused, but I still don't have the information I need to make a decision as an executive, right? So you say, okay, give me some data. So maybe you're going to say, well, we had over 4,000 customer requests to our call centers in April, right? Now I have some data. You feel really good. You showed up with your data. But this data has no context, right? I have no idea what to do with it. Is that good? Is that bad? It's like somebody telling you the Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 20 points. Is that a lot or a little? I don't know unless I know what the absolute number is above it, right? So there has to be some context. So one data point is not enough. And then what if you're trying to say, well, oh, our consumer call centers are overloaded and we have all these requests. We have to create a consumer information landing page. That's what we have to do. So this is how a typical internal communications report looks very frequently, right? But this is not what you need to do. If you want to do really strong rapid response communications, you have to do a much better job of grounding your story in data. Not that this is wrong, but it's not enough for an executive to make a confident decision. So instead, I'm going to show you an example of what you really want to be thinking about so that leadership can make the right decision, right? And I'm going to show you, remember, we're talking about, we want to make sure that we have data, we want to make sure we have structure, and we want to make sure we have a clear call to action. So an alternative executive report out might look like this, right? So now, instead of saying we have 4,352 calls, you compare it, April this year versus April last year. Oh, now I can see what a huge jump in calls we've had, 256 versus 4,000 plus. I'm not telling you, I'm showing you we have a problem, right? It's believable. And our average wait times, which used to be under a minute in our call center, is now over 17 minutes. Okay, now I'm at risk because somebody might hang up, not want to wait those 17 minutes to get the real information. They might use our product incorrectly, right? And last year in April, we had 0 calls about injecting our brand name consumer product. And this year, 95% of our volume is associated with that request, right? So you can see why, as an executive, this is extremely persuasive because I'm using the data to show you, not tell you that I need to act, right? The gravity of the problem and the fact that it is a problem becomes instantly clear, okay? And then I added this, completely made up example about your positive negative sentiment ratio on Twitter coming into the Twitter help. So it used to be that we were getting 88% positive tweets, and maybe now we're getting 56. So consumers are mad at us, right? That's what's super clear here. And then, so you've got your data, right? And now you have to say, okay, what does this matter for an executive? Again, we're thinking about crisis or rapid response communications for executives. I need to be able to make a decision in one slide. What's my legal risk and what do you recommend, right? So, okay, you have that. But the most important thing, remember I said you got to have that very, very clear call to action. So we've got our structure, which is there's going to be a risk, there's going to be a recommendation, there's going to be some metrics that we use to measure our success, and then we're going to have our leadership decision is required. So when you do this report out, make your report look like this every single day so that the brain is ready to say, I know what I'm supposed to do. And this piece of it is really important, that call to action. So leadership knows that's me. I have to make a particular decision associated with this. Does that make sense? Right? So you can see on one slide, you've done all of those 3 things. And you've thought really clearly about who needs to see this and what do they need to do. So leadership can just make that decision very quickly. Any questions about that? Okay. So basically, the takeaways I want you to have from this are very, very straightforward. Just make sure you have believable data and make sure you get your data right. And it happens very often, especially in large enterprise organizations. Sometimes things are fuzzy, or you might not even have the data that you need associated with that particular decision, because you never had to make that decision before. This is the first time ever that the president mentioned injecting, disinfectants. So this problem didn't exist before. So you might have to go ahead and figure out with your business intelligence team, what's the right data we need to gather to make a smart decision associated with that. So you as the communications person have to be the one to raise your hand and say, hey, wait a minute, we don't have the right data that we need to make the decision. We have to make sure that we drill down and we get that right story. And then you also, as the person who's in charge of communications, you have to come up with what that repeatable structure is going to look like. That report doesn't exist. That problem never existed before. So you have to create that from scratch. And so when you think about what's really important in enterprise communications and that capability that you're going to bring to it, just the fact that you know that the structure, and then pushing back against people and making sure they brought the right story to you is very powerful, right? And then also understanding that the target audience really matters. Who are we talking to? And if you're speaking to executives and they have to make a decision, make sure you're really clear about the decision that that person has to make. Okay. And then finally, I cannot stress enough, doesn't matter what kind of communication you're creating, that call to action is really powerful. It's just as powerful in internal communications as it is outside. So that's it. That was pretty much, what I wanted to cover for today in terms of when you think about rapid response. And with that, I will turn it over to the Q&A part. I did put on here in case people wanted to follow up with me later. You can tweet me, you can contact us at Rumble. And with that, Anita, I will let you take it away.
Do you want to stop sharing your screen, yep, Carol, so we can come back to the full view of this wonderful audience? Great. Thanks so much. And I know I've got a number of questions, and I want to just extend again the invitation at the chat box. Ryan is eagerly awaiting to hear from you. Do not let our Zoom DJ down. And I know that there are a number of questions. We've seen some of them that have come in via the thought exchange. I want to thank Roger for managing that. And so what I've done is try to curate a couple questions that came in through that thought exchange process before the talk, Carol, but I also have some questions that are both drawn from your presentation right now, but also just knowing about knowing a little bit about what your life has looked like the last 3 months in particular. And while I know that Medtronics is a client and I'm not asking for specificity, I would love to ask and see if you would be willing to talk a little bit about the way in which the work that you thought you were going to be doing for them shifted in terms of what were the kinds of psychological shifts and then also really tactical shifts that you had to make to transform the way you were going to support them in the time of COVID?
Well, I think the biggest shift was, and you and I had talked about this when we were thinking about, what we're going to say is, a big part of what I do with large organizations, whether it's Medtronic or any other organization, is talk about organizational storytelling. And how do you bring your story to life in a way that's meaningful for stakeholders? And typically we have a little bit more time to think about that, to massage it, to perfect it. And one of the things that happens when you're working with an organization where things are moving very quickly and literally lives are at stake, right? I mean, these people are always aware every single day that they're making life-saving equipment, life-saving medical devices. And so when you feel, oh my gosh, what we do really matters at that level, you have a little bit of less of a luxury of time to say, oh, well, we'll massage this a little more this way, a little more that way. This is about making really important decisions that have to happen right away. But, on a larger scale, making sure that your communications are clear and that your story is instantly understandable, that doesn't change whether you're in crisis mode or not.
That doesn't change whether you're in crisis mode or not. And I know that you work carefully and diligently with institutions of all sizes to think about that preemptively. So you want to have that that messaging in a way that's really clear, and as you've just shared with us, immediately actionable. Yes, you have to decide around audience and make that quick connection, but one of the questions that builds, I think, off of that came in via the thought exchange was, do you have recommendations for the way in which this kind of rapid response communication can scale in institutions that are larger? I know you've worked with various sizes of companies and institutions across various sectors. And so are there particular elements that you would want to add to what you've shared with us just now around the, your very well laid out items of action when it comes to rapid response communication? Are there particulars when it comes to institutions that really have to scale because they either are transnational or they've just got a large employee base, even in a domestic market?
I mean, it's really hard to say. A lot of things, when you talk about whether you're able to do things quickly, sometimes it's cultural, right? Different companies have different levels of tolerance. But I bet you if you look around now, you're going to see a lot of companies that have developed a much higher tolerance for doing things in unusual ways than they ever had before. So I think a lot of companies had to make very quick decisions that they probably wouldn't have ever imagined before. And that applies not just to, everybody's now going to have to go work from home. Companies that before really felt like, no, everybody has to be in the office. Now they're going to be able to work from home. And that applies to communications too. So in the past, maybe you'd have to go through layers and layers of bureaucracy to get certain types of communications approved. Maybe now some companies are going to be more flexible about that. But each company is going to have to make a decision in terms of their comfort level and their culture, and they're going to have to talk to their legal counsel. So I don't think there's a one size fits all, but I do think when you show up with proof, right? When you show up and say, look, I need a landing page by tomorrow because 95% of our volume coming into call centers right now is associated with this problem. Mm-hmm. And we are now at legal risk because we are not answering calls in time. And so what you want to do is bring stakeholders in. So if you can get legal on your side and say, yeah, not having a website spun up overnight is going to be more risky than having it, and being able to prove it, that's very powerful, because legal will look at that and say, oh my God, we can't afford to have a situation where people aren't getting their phone calls picked up for more than 17 minutes. People are going to hang up, and then we're going to get in trouble because we didn't give them the advice they needed, right? So that's why the data is so powerful, because it helps you move things forward in organizations that otherwise might not be willing to do it. And I think that's true. It doesn't, big or small. The willingness to try something new is driven by the, sort of the power of the proof.
And that power of the proof, the example you gave is what I'll categorize as quantitative data. You're showing a difference in call volume, you're seeing an uptick in numbers, and that quantitative data is often seen as very persuasive because we like things we can count. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about all the various, have you seen examples of qualitative data that can also be persuasive in terms of having the impact with leadership to shift and respond in a way that's very agile and timely?
Right. Yeah, I totally, yes. The short answer to that is yes. If you can have qualitative data, and if you can have especially testimonials of one kind or another, those individual stories can be very powerful. But in my experience, the bigger the company, the bigger the enterprise, regardless of what industry they're in, the most persuasive thing is data. They're happy to see that qualitative testimonial. We definitely want that. We want to see, oh my gosh, this particular thing happened on Twitter or Facebook, we got an email or whatever. But the most persuasive and the bigger the organization is, the more that is the case. Because they have so many moving parts.
Right. As you're describing that, and it makes a lot of sense to me, I'm thinking too, though, and I want to go back to Medtronic, because you mentioned that when you have a company that is in the business of producing something that suddenly has taken on a very high profile because it's directly related to people's health and welfare, I'm curious, what have you observed, or what might you recommend in terms of thinking about the way in which the narrative around the importance of our work, and I'm talking about from an employee perspective, because with rapid communication, it requires a level of cohesion, I would say. I mean, actually, I'm asking you in terms of you commenting on the cohesion needed to actually step through these processes that you've just laid out. But when it comes to Medtronic, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how do you capture for the individuals at the institution who are having to prepare this information, having to see it disseminated, having to make the case, having to put forward the proof. To what extent do you help facilitate, and what's the value in tapping into that quality of product that
was going to happen? I knew my dog was going to bark just now. I could see his tail wagging in the background.
It wouldn't be.
Let me just open my door and let him out. Hold on a second.
It would not be a Zoom call without a pet somehow factoring in to a Zoom meeting.
It's so funny because as you were talking, I could see his tail getting ready, like saying to me, "Mom, open the door." Sorry, everybody. So again, I mean, I cannot speak at all about my work at Medtronic, as I told you. Like that, I just, that is very locked down. But I can say that as a general principle, and this is true because as we talked about from the beginning, I work with a lot of enterprise organizations, and my team works with a lot of enterprise organizations. The data that you need for that particular situation may not be packaged in that particular way. Your role is to say, we have business analytics, right? We have business intelligence. Who do I need to talk to? Which organizations do I need to tap into to get the data that we need to make this particular decision, right? And just understanding that the people who have that data may be in different places. You might have to tap into different groups and make sure you get what you need to make that big picture decision, and then proactively going and getting it. That is a big part of your role. And people don't typically think of that in communications, right? You think somebody else is going to just give you a chart and then you're going to turn it into a presentation of some kind. That isn't true. Sometimes you have to help figure out, in order to tell this story, I need this particular data. Yeah. And let the data speak, because you don't know what the answer is. Just like when you think about that, that example of how would, large disinfecting companies respond to something that the president says. It's not a no-brainer, that response. You have to prove that you have to, whatever that thing is that you're going to decide how you're going to respond, you have to know by what's actually incoming, what the data is. Oh, do we have to respond to this or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I could talk to you all evening, but I want to make sure that we get involvement from the bright lights that are on this call as well. And so I think I'm going to now ask my colleague Ryan Quigtar, Zoom DJ, to start bringing forward some of the questions that have been already, I see, propagating in the chat box, and then we will continue to volley back and forth as these questions come in. So Ryan, are there questions that you can pose?
Yes, there's a couple questions coming in now. Thank you all for submitting, and please continue to do so. The first question we had comes from Kate, and this kind of goes back to talking about data and sharing that. Is there a use case for making this data public to be more transparent to customer stakeholders? For example, sorry for the wait times, we're doing our best. See.
Yeah, this is really, this is a really important point, right? So it depends. The answer is, every organization is going to have different ideas around what they will or won't disclose. But wait times are very obviously something that you want to disclose very transparently. And in the past, I've definitely worked with companies that had to deal with outages. I used to work with a company that provided a technology calendaring service to families. And you can imagine, if you're a busy parent and you have your entire life built in a digital calendar and your kids are scheduled minute to minute of the day and your calendar goes down, that's a disaster, right? So even a half an hour of outage means a missed baseball game or grandma's birthday card didn't go out or whatever. People get very upset, right? So whenever there's any kind of outage, we used to have to come up with communications that would immediately disclose, hey, we are having an issue and here's what you can expect. And we're, you have to find some way to apologize for it, right? And so again, this is where the data comes in. You have to first, before you can go out and put up on your Facebook feed or your Twitter feed or your support page, whatever it is, you have to know, well, do we know what the problem is? Do we know how long it's going to last? Do we know how many people are being affected? Because if you get a report of an outage from one person, right, and then you tell 10 million customers we're having an outage, and you don't, what if maybe that only that one person is having an outage, right? So you can't just because you get one incoming report. So the question is, how many incoming reports do you have to get until you decide, yes, we have a real problem? And you have to diagnose that root cause, and you have to get a message up. And that means there has to be some kind of governance structure and some policies around that. So when a certain percentage of people are out, we will do a public message. Below a certain percentage of people, maybe we're just going to individually contact them and tell them, hey, we're working on such and such a problem, right? And this happens in all of our lives, right? If your internet connectivity goes down at home, what's the first thing you do? You get on your phone and you look up and you see, is Comcast having an outage in my neighborhood? Is it just me or is it everybody, right? And so what Comcast has to do is they have to make a decision around how quickly can we spin up an answer to whether or not we're genuinely having an outage, because that hurts our brand, right? We don't want to announce outages every single day. So what's the threshold, and it's a database threshold for making that decision? And then how do we communicate that? And I remember one time, we had a quite long outage, and normally people would be quite upset. And so we said, we understand this is a really big problem. We have every engineer in the company working on it. And you can be sure that, everybody's going to be working all night long until we get this turned on. And people were, getting onto our Facebook feed and saying, send the guys pizza. We know they're working hard. We got more positive sentiment than negative sentiment on that, because people were very appreciative of the fact that we knew that their problem mattered and we showed them that we cared. So sometimes even if you have to announce an outage, it can go better than you would expect as long as you're very transparent. So transparency does have a role, but you can't announce every single outage. Otherwise, it just looks like you're always down when you aren't. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'd love to follow up in terms of that transparency, because I'm struck in these days that there's a collective recognition that there are going to be glitches. There are going to be things that don't function the way that we expect them to because of certain stressors on certain sectors. And I'm wondering how you would, advise and recommend to both accept and engage in the idea that we have both shorter fuses, but I think a higher level of grace potentially. And those two things aren't always, those operate together, but companies need to be mindful in this time of COVID that both of those emotional resonance, both of those emotional realities exist.
Right. Well, that's interesting. I think one of the big dangers for larger organizations, but smaller organizations do this too, is that, I call it like the danger of the canned response. So when you have a packaged response that shows, this happens to us all the time, no big deal. Everyone knows, you don't really care. There's no skin off your nose one way or the other. So that automatically is a turnoff for customers. They want to know that you have real skin in the game just like they do, and that you can empathize with whatever inconvenience your problem is created. But at the same time, that it's going to take some time to fix this problem. So yes, we recognize this is a problem, but it can't ring hollow. And we've all had that experience of calling up some kind of support line and they say, oh, we're very sorry for the inconvenience. It's totally unbelievable, right? They don't really care about your inconvenience. So the danger of the canned response is something you got to be really careful of, and crafting communications that show genuine empathy and are written in your brand voice is going to get you a long way there.
Thank you, Carol. We're going to move on to the next question. And this question comes from Jay. Thank you, Jay, for joining us. Are CEOs going to become less disciplined with their communication since our president shoots from the hip so much? And then the next question he also poses is, does the communication behavior at the highest level of our government give them permission to act in kind, i.e. starting falsehoods, not to be concerned with data, etc.?
Yeah, I saw that one. Look, I'm not going to predict what CEOs are or not going to do. But I think that, customers have a lot of power, to say whether they do or don't like what a CEO is doing by, going elsewhere. So I don't think, what happens in the government should not be permission for our decisions. We have to hold ourselves as communicators to the highest level of excellence. and just respond to what we see as the needs of our market. We want to survive in what's going to be honestly the toughest market ever. This is not the time to be lax. This is the time to be better than ever. We have to up our game now. We're certainly not backing down. I don't see this as permission. I think the market we're going to all be facing right now is going to demand even better communications, clearer and more data-based than ever before.
Mm-hmm. If I may also jump in, Ryan, for a second, there was you're talking about as you were putting words together around that idea of now is the time for superb communication. We're going to have to up our game. We're going to have to be able to basically lead the way in terms of the superb communication that is necessary for society to move forward. And one of the thought exchange questions that came in that I'm going to dovetail with that answer, Carol, is around if for somebody looking to jump into the job market, start to stake their claim in terms of defining themselves as a communications professional, what would be some advice that you would give in this particular time to show the kind of caliber that would be seen as advantageous to add to a team?
Okay, so anyone who's taken my class is going to know I got my favorite answer to this question. This is another example of show, don't tell. Your LinkedIn profile better be freaking amazing right now. If you are in the communications field and your LinkedIn profile doesn't show what a great communicator you are, what you're doing is showing the opposite, right? So this is your chance to shine. So when you put any kind of communication out there about yourself, about your personal brand, it has to show that you can do for a company just what you do for yourself. So go take a good hard look at your LinkedIn profile if you're out looking to either move in your career or look for new opportunities, because I can tell you that's the first thing we look at when we hire, right? And if somebody says to me, oh, I know how to help companies put together digital plans or strategic communications, okay, but the first thing I'm gonna do is go read your LinkedIn profile. How do you present yourself? What's your digital brand? What's your digital communication footprint?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you, Carol. The next question again is from Kate. How do you compensate when leadership says, sorry, we don't have the budget to help with that, even when the data supports your claims?
Look, you don't. That's why they're in leadership. The point is you're not going to win every battle. Not every project gets funded. Your job is to make your best possible case. And leadership has to make tough calls right now. Think about it in your own life. There are many things that we want to do in life, but we have to make sometimes tough calls. Sometimes we don't get the thing we want. And leadership will respect that. If you always show up with the proof, you'll get funded more often than not. But it's unrealistic to think you're always going to get what you want. You may not have the big picture.
Thank you. The next question is from Alexis. How did you manage the workload when all your clients needed help with COVID at the same time? Seems like communicators are overworked right now.
Well, for sure, people are quite overworked right now. I hired more people, I've added 3 people to the team in the last 12 weeks. And then I think people are just they're working more now. Sometimes that happens. The reason it's called crisis communications or rapid response communications is because, there's just being more demanded of us, but it's not going to last forever. And this is our chance to show what we can do. So I think it's okay that sometimes it's really tough.
Carol, if I can jump in here, I know that I would love to hear you speak more. Speaking of you have such an encyclopedic sense of examples, not only from this time, but I think in the past as well. And I'd love to hear you talk about examples of real successes where you saw that the rapid response was one that worked really well and that really gives life to the kind of recommendations that you shared in the beginning of your presentation.
Oh God, I wish I knew you were going to ask me this question because I could show some really fun examples if I could, get the screenshots of them. I thought that the response of, I think it was KFC in the UK, Kentucky Fried Chicken in the UK, there was some kind of run. I guess they came out with some kind of special recipe and everyone was really excited about it. And so they ran out of chicken, right? And I don't know, am I really allowed to use obscenities in this? Are we allowed to use curse words in this recording? So they
Carol,
took,
you can say whatever you would like.
so they had the, the KFC. Okay, think of the letters KFC, and they twisted them around. So instead of saying OKFC, they had OFCK, right? In an ad that they published in full page ads all around the UK, just saying like, oh my God, a chicken franchise that's out of chicken, we totally screwed up. And it was funny, and it was, they turned it around. I mean, they turned that creative around so fast, and they turned the narrative around. People were laughing. They thought it was hilarious, and it was so on brand for them. It was so cheeky in terms of, putting a message like that out, and they completely turned that narrative around. They turned a story of, I can't believe these people are out of chicken, into, that is the coolest brand ever. I thought that was a great example. I wish I could show you the screenshot of now. Everyone should Google that. Go Google the campaign for KFC in the UK where they go OFCK. It was so great.
How about some examples of rapid response that are specific to our time here in COVID, given the nature of the communication soup that you're swimming in right now?
I think, some of the reporting that's been done and the data that's been delivered around, caseloads and testing, that the New York Times pulled together some amazing reporting around COVID-19. And in fact, their data was so valuable that they got so many requests from different municipalities that they ended up spinning it up into a dashboard that people could go into. And you can go into the New York Times even now and put in it's either your city or your zip code, and see what's going on in your area in terms of the data. And I happen to, I happen to think that was one of the most incredible turnarounds of database storytelling. And New York Times gets all the credit for that. They did an amazing job. And I believe it's their team at the Upshot that's doing that. That's a section of the Times that's around data. It's all their digital storytelling. And they do an incredible job. I cannot praise highly enough the work that they've done. I think the Seattle Times has probably done some pretty amazing work too, but that particular database storytelling stands out to me.
And given, the emphasis on database storytelling, I want to spend a moment considering that do you have recommendations for what people can do preemptively to be efficient and successful in the way that they collect data, so that so that when you find yourself in a rapid response situation, you aren't scrambling to be collecting data at that moment? And obviously certain circumstances are going to necessitate that there's a level of data collection that happens in the moment. But what are your recommendations for those of us here on this call tonight in terms of having that antenna up, and what are some recommendations you have for perennial data collection that will then be useful in those moments of need when it has to be rapid and you may not have a lot of time to collect data, and you want to make sure that the data that you do collect and share is accurate?
Yeah, well, if you're on the call and you work in a big enterprise organization, the business intelligence team is a place to make friends, for sure. Those people really know their stuff, and they, I think, will greatly appreciate the partnership with the communications team. And even, I bet you it doesn't even happen that often that the communications team spends time hanging out with the BI people and saying, hey, we actually feel like you're an anchor in our good communication. So build those relationships in advance. And if you work in a smaller organization, sometimes it's really hard because you don't necessarily have the budget to do a lot of data gathering. So it's probably a good idea to think about, well, what are we really going to use? Because if you can't use what you're measuring, then you're just spinning your wheels. So just pick some very discrete things that you're going to need to know. Like, how do our customers feel? Having your pulse on how your customers feel about certain types of things. And maybe if you can't measure everything, maybe just measure the stuff associated with your most important products. Say, okay, if a certain amount of our products make up 80% of our revenue, maybe we don't spend that much time understanding what's going on with the other 20%. Not that that's good. I don't think that's good. But if you have to make a really tough call, go after the stuff that's making the biggest difference in your business, I guess. I'd have to think about it a little bit more, but I typically say that, yeah.
Do you think it's possible to generalize a little bit on case studies where or is there a consistency in terms of what kind of data is most persuasive in certain moments. You've given us an example in your presentation where it was very, it was a clear uptick in terms of data, of numbers, but are there other things you might add in terms of sniffing out the best kinds of data and what you
Yeah. I mean, look, every company cares about revenue, right? Revenue. Have an iron grip on that. Where's the revenue coming from? What's your cost centers? And then where's your legal risk? Because those are the kinds of things that leadership always has to pay attention to. So start with that. Revenue, cost centers, legal risk. Of course, you want to know sentiment, brand sentiment, what people are saying about your brand. That's reputation management, but that's the next level, right?
Got it. Good. Well, I think I'm going to go back to the Zoom DJ. I think we have one more question.
Thank you. We got one more question from Alexis. Do you have any comments on copywriting right now? There's a lot of noise, and based on last week's presentation, also a lot of sameness. What are some quick tips for avoiding those pitfalls?
So Alexis, can I ask you to elaborate? I didn't join, unfortunately, last week, so I don't want to comment too much on something I don't know. What were they talking about copywriting and sameness? Can you maybe explain a little bit?
Jay is actually on this call too. Is Jay still here?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, we showed a super cut. I think it was like 3 minutes and 30 seconds of different corporations, their messaging and TV commercials. And whoever created the super cut did a really good job, but it seemed like 100 different companies, and they were all saying the exact same thing. So like they all had piano music at the beginning. They all had, family. Yeah, and then they all went to, we're here for you. And it was just all the same.
Was there a lot of stay at home together?
Yeah, oh yeah, a lot of that. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so the question was, based on last week's presentation, there's a lot of sameness. What are some tips for avoiding those pitfalls? Well, first of all, having an awareness of what everyone else is doing. So don't create your copy and your campaign in a vacuum. So sometimes you can have a great idea, but if somebody's already had that great idea, you have to torch it, right? And then if everybody is doing, if you kind of know everybody's doing the same thing, and you don't want to do that, you have to, let me think about this. I don't want to just shoot from the hip here. So we are not right now really all the same. That's the truth, right? And every product and every every service, there's something unique about it, and there's something unique about their target audience. And I think the problem, what happened with that was everyone was trying to get at this higher level feel-good message, which is true. That at its core, what is so frightening about the situation we're in right now is that this is affecting all humanity. No one is safe from it, right? And so they're trying to tap into that common emotion, which isn't a bad thing, right? It isn't a bad thing to say, oh, we want to tap into our common humanity. People love that. So the question is, how do you tap into what's unique about your target audience and what your product or service is, and think about, is this unique to our brand voice? And again, this is something I do talk about a little bit in my class. When you have companies that deliver similar things but have to have some kind of unique brand voice, you go back to the core personality that you have defined for your brand. And every company should have this, right? We're edgy and urban, or we're fresh and open, or different brands will have different personalities associated with them. And then take a hard look at your message and say, is there anything edgy and urban about the way we've said this? Because if there isn't, time to go back to the drawing board, right? What are our core brand personality traits? Usually you have 4 or 5 of them. And when we work on a campaign for a company, we have for every single company a separate kind of cheat sheet around what that company's core tenets are, who their target audience is, what is their brand personality and voice, and that goes right up on the wall during all campaign discussions for that company, right? And that has to be front and center, and every great idea has to go through that filter. And you could have a great idea, let's say something's really clever and snappy, but it's a very serious and conservative company. Well, then they don't get that line because it's not right for their brand. And that's one of the ways that you can avoid sameness, by pushing it up against that test and doing what we call, killing your darlings. You might have a piece of copy that you love, but if it's not right for that brand, it's got to go. Does that help?
It does.
Easier said than done, though. This is why great copywriting takes a team, and it takes a lot of time and work. It's so funny to see how frequently copy gets sort of short shrift, right? And people think, oh, anybody can write. Well, it's easy until you sit down and do it, right? And then you realize, well, if copy is so easy, you wouldn't end up with all these companies with the exact same message. It's hard to be unique. It's hard to be fresh. It takes people who are breaking their teeth on different ideas and going back to the drawing board over and over again. We've worked with some clients where you have to give them 100 good ideas before they pick two. Not 100 bad ideas before they picked you. You had to do 500 good ideas, get it down. It's constant cutting. It's a lot of work. Don't think you're going to write copy overnight. That's just not the way great copywriting happens.
Yeah, and I hear you saying it's not just only generative, but you have to have that alignment between the tone and the defined values of that institution. And if it doesn't have that alignment, it doesn't matter how sparklingly well it's written, it's still not going to land.
Right, and it's teamwork. That Mad Men model where you see a bunch of creative people in a room bouncing ideas off each other, that's how it's done. It's not one genius sitting home in the room going, writing the lines and handing it off.
No.
Not usually.
Another good plug for why that idea of peer feedback is just so vital.
Yep.
Ryan, I think another question has come in and we do have time. Do you want to pose it?
Yeah. The question is, can you please share some case studies specifically to rapid communication?
So really, anytime there's a business trigger that forces you to change the way you think or communicate, you're talking about a case study in rapid communication. And, think about WeWork, okay? Remember when that was a big story 100 million years ago, right? Okay, so last fall, WeWork was trying to do an IPO, and all of a sudden, it became very obvious that their business model wasn't as rock solid as everybody thought. Their numbers came out looking really ugly, and when you're going public, unfortunately, you have to share your numbers, right? And it got very ugly very fast. So that is an example of rapid response communication that was handled pretty badly. And we have offices here at the WeWork right here in downtown Bellevue. And so I got all of the communications, the messaging that was coming from WeWork to the customers. It was so bad. I blogged about it. You can go to my blog, and it was terrible. It was a case study in what not to do, because their communications were canned and took no account of the fact that the target audience was a bunch of people who really cared about the fact that they had businesses that they were building. They felt really excited about what they were doing, and they were located in a brand that all of a sudden was quite tarnished, right? And I, at the time, was thinking, think about all the amazing stories that are happening inside of WeWork buildings every single day. Tons of great stories happening. And instead, the only story you heard every day was the constant drumbeat about WeWork's financials. But imagine how powerful it would have been if WeWork had gone out and said, hey, let's get all of the people doing amazing work inside our buildings and highlight their stories. Not that it would take away the negative story around their financials, but it would have balanced it with, their financials are bad, but the people who are working inside of WeWork are doing amazing things, right? And so that would be an example of where you have to pivot so fast with a rapid communication. That would be an example of it. And an acquisition is another example. Whenever you have a company acquisition, usually something like that is kept quiet until the very last minute. And then you rapidly have to roll that out. So of course you're planning for it, but once that becomes public, there's a lot of stuff associated with that that's going to happen that you're going to have to chase down. And so that would be another example where you have to be really ready for that. And you plan as much as you can, but eventually, when reality hits, you're going to have to just, you're going to have to respond to whatever occurs.
Yeah. You mentioned your blog. Is that on the Rumble Marketing?
Yep. And also on LinkedIn. I publish articles on LinkedIn because that's really where people are. So if you don't want to go to Rumble, just go over to LinkedIn
Because we're gonna put it in the chat for everybody. So
yeah. I think that article that we work might have been that one might have been in LinkedIn.
Okay.
On my LinkedIn profile, it's an article, and it was just very simple about like why isn't LinkedIn using their great community? And I have to say I've been really remiss in updating my articles on LinkedIn recently, just because we've been so busy. But again, I encourage all of you as professional communicators another chance to show don't tell. You can write articles on LinkedIn about the work that you're doing or the opportunities that you see. It's a very powerful tool to show your expertise in whatever your area is.
Yeah. And that example about the missed opportunity with WeWork, instead of leading with the more technical, but actually diving into what are the experiential stories that are happening there. I mean, a real miss for empathy, as you've talked about earlier.
Yeah. Evelyn, I see that you put the link to the Rumble page, but really I think that's on my personal, if you go to LinkedIn /in/Carol Schiller, there's articles there. I think, Evelyn, it's one of the articles.
And Sarah, thanks so much for posting the case study that you encountered in Melissa Schwartz's class. And for those that have been a part of this series from the beginning, Melissa was our kickoff speaker on mindfulness and well-being in the time of COVID. So I appreciate you putting that in there. So Carol, as we move to the final phase, I know you've prepared a call to action. So would you like to share that? And then I've got a few announcements before we move to the after party.
Yeah, so it's interesting when you said, my call to action is really the call to action associated with my presentation, because I feel like this is our kind of fundamental core job as communicators, which is show, don't tell, right? Mm-hmm. So it's so easy to forget the power of bringing some proof to the table, but if you can show what you can do, it's so much more persuasive. So as communicators, start with that.
Excellent. Very, very good. Well, at this point, I want to first and foremost, thank you, Carol, for, as you say, on this eve of a holiday weekend, joining us during happy hour, bringing your spirit and your happy hour sensibilities to this COVID talk. I'm deeply appreciative. We're so fortunate to have you as part of the faculty team at ComLead, but really more so, I think you've demonstrated why you bring such value to so many institutions, both here and beyond. So thanks so much for joining us tonight. And along with a hearty thank you to you, I definitely want to do a shout out to all 5 members of the ComLead COVID consultancy. Stacy, who I believe is on this call, our Zoom DJ tonight, Ryan, Susan, I don't know if Susan's here, Meg, and especially Evelyn, who I very much know is here because this has been her baby in terms of the launch of our particular events associated with the COVID consultancy. So huge shout out to those 5. Also want to thank Roger, one of our students, for his work with the Thought Exchange. Very helpful to be able to harness questions in advance of the talk. And I also want to give a shout out to Mo, our multimedia tutor and student with ComLead, for the tech support this evening, because lots of moving parts with a Zoom call, and Mo keeps the trains running on time. So grateful for that. Alex, also my colleague, who's the ComLead head of strategy, somebody that's brought so much thinking and intentionality to the way that the consultancy operates. So I want to give him props as well. As with every one of these events, we'll be sending out a video capture of tonight. It'll also include a short takeaway, and we also have a brief survey that we would love folks to fill out. Ryan, are we going to drop that survey in the chat, or maybe it's already there?
Yeah, I believe Evelyn just dropped that in.
Evelyn put it in there, super. So if you'd like to take the survey tonight, take care of things. It's already in the chat box, but you will be getting it over email as well. As I've mentioned in earlier talks, if you are new to ComLead and want to learn more, very much invite you to visit our website, follow up with any of us here on this particular event, and we would be delighted to talk to you more about ways you might get involved, whether it's as a student, as a faculty member, as a community member. There are many ways to engage with ComLead, and we really do see the mandate of a public institution is to bridge to the community. So the fact that these events can be something that students, alumni, and faculty experience, but we also want to extend it out to the broader community and welcome all of you and thank all of you that were able to join us for perhaps what was one of your first experiences with ComLead. Next week, I am so excited to be inviting Dr. Valerie Manusoff to conversation. She's a colleague of ours at the Department of Communication, a full professor, and a scholar when it comes to nonverbal communication, and she's given that, going to present to us for the fourth of the COVID series, a nonverbal communication in the time of COVID lecture. And that conversation is going to look at not only nonverbal communication in computer-mediated environments like we're experiencing tonight, but I think Valerie's also going to talk about nonverbal communication in the way that we encounter one another outside in these days of masks and giving people wide berths. So I think that the conversation will look at both our online nonverbal communication experiences in the time of COVID, but also our offline experiences of nonverbal
really cool.
Yeah. So I really hand it to the consultancy for putting together this 5-part series that looks at this time of COVID through the different lenses based on the expertise of faculty at the department. And Carol, you are no exception. So we're so pleased to have had you.